Okay, so the credit is below, and the Japanese parts of this video I would try to translate it. And I have to do it quick because my friend's story is gonna disappear and I'm way too lazy to search out like the original source, but here we go. So, ハンドルを握るのは which means the person behind the wheel, like the driver.
を握っているのは
Yes, yes, yes.
Okay, so this one, the yosh, yosh, my yosh. So, usually, I think the convention for different bus operators in Japan is that maybe they will change the order in which like they do the checks, but I think something that's like the more common one would be like 前よし、車内よし、右よし、左よし, or is it 左 first then 右? But basically the reason why they're doing all these, like as you can see, like the point checks, like you point, it's because it's to confirm that like, okay, everything within the bus is all right, everything in front is all clear, everything to the left and to the right of you is all clear, and you are ready to depart per se, or like when you're ready to turn. So basically that's what the point calling in Japanese is called shisakanko. They do it for bus, they do it for trains, but for bus they have their kind of shisakanko, for train they have their kind of shisakanko as well. The shi is referring to side, and then when you compound it with sa, shisa kind of means like parallax. You know, like the parallax error that you learn in school. So basically that's what shisa means. Kanko is like yobimasu っていうこと, like basically you call out, like yobu, the dictionary form means to like call. So you say yosh, yosh, my yosh. So that is a form of like calling. おつかまりください. It refers to please hold on tight, because the bus is moving off, but it just means please hold on tight.
インドネシア国籍の男女さん
So basically, it used to be like the foreigners could only, okay, when they started out, they kind of like pilot tested another Indonesian national, like a person of Indonesian nationality. They debuted on like a highway expressway bus. Okay, for expressway bus, because there are like fewer stops, it's a lot less taxing when it comes to like the language barrier. But in this case, in short, right, now bus captains of like foreign descent have, or like of foreign nationalities at least, they have finally been given the chance to debut in like actual bus company. Okay, not really, I shouldn't really say actual bus companies, I should say like in actual bus route. Okay, oh no, that's still not a good way to put it. It's like, because expressway bus routes and highway bus routes, like the ones that use coach buses, they are still actual bus routes. So I should say ordinary bus routes, meaning like Dosen Bus. Dosen Bus, it is like, Japan has like this distinction between Kosoku bus and oh my god, sorry, Japan has the distinction between Kosoku bus, meaning expressway, like high speed bus, but it's just another way to translate, oh my god. Okay, so it means like, it literally means high speed bus, but the actual like translation for it is like highway bus, expressway bus. And then Dosen bus is basically like ordinary bus. It literally means like route bus, but it just means like ordinary bus services. Like, you know, in let's say Hong Kong, you have like KMB, City Bus, New World First Bus, which unfortunately got absorbed back into, I don't know, they are no longer a thing, unfortunately. But you know, basically these like how I would say basic bus operators, which is why I almost said like, oh, actual bus operators, but you know, I don't script my videos, so this is the result of it. So foreigners are now able to debut, like obviously with training, like they are finally able to debut on the ordinary bus routes as well. And the reason why ordinary bus routes are more challenging is because the language barrier actually kind of like kicks into play. Like it's a little bit more demanding on the language side of things, because you're gonna have to like be able to respond to the passengers when they require, like, you know, when they want to top up their transport cards in Japan, or if they want to buy Teikiken on board the bus, which is kind of like a monthly concession pass, like on board the bus. I know you can buy it at like the bus station office. That's what they call it, like bus station office, like at the bus interchange, bus terminal, but it's more of like bus station office. But then sometimes they actually allow you to purchase it like on the bus itself, or maybe they might ask for directions, like ichome, like every single thing, like you have to know. So language wise, like for people of like non-Japanese descent, like for people of like foreign nationalities, the language wise is just a little bit more demanding for路線 bus as compared to like Kosoku bus. So that's like the distinction. So yes, 3 Indonesians have managed to debut basically as bus captain, like bus drivers. So they're introducing themselves. Japan is a really wonderful country. So working as a bus driver in Japan, so it's kind of like his dream has come true. 自分にとって夢のよう。So this one, okay, for this one he's saying that he had 興味 means like interest. I know you could translate it a little bit differently, but I would just say that like he has, or like had, and is still continuing his interest. He has an interest in, you know, Japan's like bus operations, and probably wants to become like a bus captain himself. And congratulations, he managed to become one. 一生懸命頑張ります means like I will do my best.
唯一の外国人女性運転士。
唯一の外国人女性運転士. So the only female bus driver of foreign nationality that's in the entire Japan, if I'm not mistaken.
マハトミさん、26歳。
She's 26. 曲がるときどこを見るか basically like when you turn, like where exactly you're supposed to see, like left or right. もう慣れてきました which means she has gotten used to it. 最初はあれ見て means it means like when you first start out during like your training, you get confused as to like, hey, where are you supposed to see? ちょっと待ってください which means hang on a moment, hold on a moment, that kind of thing. Oops, sorry. Okay, so it is a short clip, but I will try to explain it a little more about like Japan's bus driver shortage right now, like nationwide bus shortage, not just like within Tokyo or what. So yeah. Actually, what should I even write about? It's like there is this thing called Tokyo Tokyo 首都圏. So this is basically referring to like, I forgot what comprises of it, like Tokyo, Kanagawa, Saitama, Chiba. It's usually these 4, right? So basically this video is more of like depicting this area because when I saw like the actual bus livery, it kind of looks like Tokyu Bus, and it might have been like from a different area that uses like Tokyu Bus's livery, but they changed. It's like they send like Tokyu buses to like when the buses in Tokyo they get old, they send it out of like the metropolitan area. They send it to like Akita, Aomori-ken, like those areas, but they keep the Tokyo livery, but they they slap their own operator logo on it, which is why in other parts of Japan it's not surprising to see the Tokyu Bus lookalikes. So, but I don't think it's from those areas. I think it's actually like the legitimate Tokyu Bus. Like I will try to verify, but I'm pretty sure that is actually Tokyu Bus in itself. And it also makes more sense to debut them in a place whereby there tends to be more tourists, like foreigners or foreigners living in general, as opposed to like in the deep suburbs or the countryside where majority of the people staying there are like ethnic Japanese. So there isn't really like an imminent need to have more people who are able to communicate in foreign languages, basically a language other than Japanese. And if you're asking, right, Japanese bus drivers technically do not need any form of like English language ability, like the qualifications wise. They might be trained to respond in simple English. Yes, that's one thing. Like they may not be able to understand anything complicated like from the tourists per se, but like in general, it's just like the railway companies as well. This is not like saying like the information boards or anything. This is like just saying, people like train drivers or bus drivers, they are technically not required to understand English, and if anything they would be taught simple English, and that's pretty much like the baseline for it. So like on average, like most Japanese people, they don't really have like a good grasp of like English, statistically, and this also applies to like bus captains as well. So with that in mind, right, it makes more sense to put people of foreign nationalities, it makes more sense to debut them in areas whereby there is actually a need for like English speaking people, or it's like catering towards like tourists that are like of a specific demographic group, like let's say they understand Bahasa Indonesia, and then that kind of thing. Okay, but the thing is, right, genetically, like a small percentage of people in Japan, they actually do have like trace Austronesian heritage, like DNA, like Indonesian DNA. So it's like, some people like they're Japanese but they look Indonesian. I know that there are cases like this, but it's more of like, let's say an area tends to have like a lot of like Indonesian tourists per se, so these people could come in handy. I'm just giving an example as to like, but this basically proves that like it proves the point that like it makes more sense to debut them in an area where there are more tourists, there are more foreigners, as opposed to like, in the deep suburbs where pretty much everybody speaks Japanese. And I do understand that some areas like Ibaraki, it doesn't really necessarily mean that like, there is like a higher percentage of foreigners staying in that area or what. But no, it's more of like, even Ibaraki, right? In those like countryside or suburb areas, like some of these areas, they tend to have like more halal food accommodations and stuff like that. Again, just another example. So yes, I am aware of the trend. Like in some areas, right, there are more people that are of foreign nationalities or like foreign descent or something along those lines. So it's kind of like a case of if they are needed in a specific area per se, then obviously naturally they would put them there. I'm only saying this because like I know there are some exceptions whereby some suburbs they tend to have more people of foreign nationalities as compared to like other suburbs. Like I wanted to say places like Nagareyama, for example, because like that's near where my house is in Japan. I mean, it's not the town where my house is. I'm from Matsudo, but like, you know, even in these like considerably remote areas, some of the demographics are like changing as well. It's like you think like, oh, this area is probably everybody here is like Japanese, like ethnic Japanese, but that's not really true. Like it just depends on the area. I'm only saying this because I want to give you guys a more full picture of like a better understanding of like what the demographics is like in Japan. So basically, in short, some areas tend to have more foreigners, and yeah, that's about it. Whether it's like in the city or in the suburbs, like there is even like a little India in Japan. I forgot if it was like Nishi Kasai or Kasai, but there is like an area whereby the population of people who have Indian heritage, it's like higher as compared to like other areas. Like you might find more, I forgot if it was like North or South Indian, but like, you know, yeah, just talking about demographics. And now let's move on to language-wise, which is something that a lot of people might be curious about. It's like if people are able to adapt to the language per se. So there is this one very generalized thing, I would say. It's that if you speak a language that is like related to the Sinosphere, which includes, I mean, usually when people think of Sinosphere, right, they think it like, oh, China origins or something. But in this sphere, there is like China, Japan, Korea, as well as I mean, there are linguistic differences even between like different regions as well, and then there is like Vietnam as well. So if you speak, if you at least speak or are fluent in one of the languages that has like a connection to the Sinosphere, you might be able to pick up Japanese a little faster as compared to people who may not have any understanding of the languages that are part of the Sinosphere, like somebody who only speaks English, or let's say when they try to speak Japanese, they might have like an English-ish accent. So this doesn't necessarily mean that, oh, as long as you know any of these languages, you would be able to pick up Japanese a lot easier. No, that's not the case. It's more of like, it just means that like some phrases that might have had like Chinese influence, like you just get reminded of it a lot. It's like it comes to your mind a lot faster. So it's not to say that, oh, you know this language, you will have like an easier time learning Japanese, but it's more of like you're able to make the connection between the Sinosphere influence words from these languages and the Sino-Japanese terms, which, you know, kunyomi and onyomi, right? Like basically some of the onyomi phrases, you might be able to like, oh, there's a connection between that and my own language, that kind of thing. You might be able to like realize it and hence make the connection and pick it up faster. Because Chinese isn't intelligible with Japanese. Korean and Vietnamese in the same fashion are not intelligible with Japanese as well, for obvious reasons. Like I just have to put it out there. But you may find like some sort of connection between like, let's say for example, Vietnamese has like as a language has a lot of like Chinese influence. In fact, they used to use like Chinese characters before they dropped it in favor of Roman letters. With I don't know how to say it, but it's like you guys have seen like Vietnamese words before. It's not just Roman letters, but they have like additional accessories to those letters. I think that's how I would say it. But linguistically, right, they have like influences from over here, like as a language. And then the same thing goes for like Sino-Korean phrases as well, or even some phrases in Chinese. It's like onyomi, right? Like on. Sorry, I should write it properly. There's kunyomi as well, like what I've said. Kunyomi is like meaning based, whereas onyomi is like sound based. So one way to like simplify onyomi, it's basically Sino-Japanese phrases, the phrases in Japan that are influenced by China. Like for example, even in Korean, right? Like the sun, you could say he or you could say taeyang, but he is like their own pronunciation and taeyang is the Sino-Korean pronunciation, which is like influenced from China. So basically, it's more of like if you study or if you are fluent in these languages, then you might be able to make a connection between like the Sino-Japanese words and the words that are originating from like your own languages. I know they have Chinese influence, but it's more of like between your own language that you speak and Japanese, you might be able to make the connections with some words. And this is what I mean by you might be able to pick it up a little faster as compared to people who don't speak any language that has influence from the Sino-sphere per se. And then pronunciation altogether is another thing. Or I could give you some, I'm not a linguistics expert, but I could give you some other examples as well. Like for example, what Japan calls denhua, Vietnam calls it like dienhua. I'm sorry, I don't know how to speak Vietnamese, but it's like for them they call it like dien. Is it this? Is it HUA or HWA? But it's something along those lines. So dienhua and denhua. And then there are also other examples like as well. Like okay, another example. I'm gonna compare Japanese and Korean because this one is like quite prominent, I would say. So in Korea they call this Gongwon, like Gongwon, and then in Japanese they call this Koen, like Kouen, although it's like romanized as Koen, like the O with a dash on top, because Kouen, when they romanize it, they throw away the U and then the U gets kind of like absorbed into the O, that kind of thing. Because when you speak, right, you don't really try to like overpronounce every single syllable. You don't be like Ko-u-en unless you're like playing a syllable game with your friends or something, but you would just say Koen, something along those lines, as long as like there is some like stretching of the sound. I know when you talk fast it kind of like disappears and you rely on context more than like actually hearing the words in itself, but it's like, again, I'm just trying to explain like the influences of different languages and how some people are just able to pick up certain languages faster than other people because of their own like linguistic like backgrounds, like the languages that they speak in like their home countries, for example. So now you might be wondering, because the example that you guys have just seen, they are Indonesians by nationality. So what about Indonesian? Bahasa Indonesia. And at the same time, I would also put in Bahasa Melayu into the mix as well. They use different words. Obviously, you could search up the internet for like the differences between these two languages. They are like actually around 70% intelligible with like one another. I would say, is it 70% or 60, 70? I would say 70% and above, even 80. But even if your language doesn't have an influence with the Sinosphere, all you have to do is just put in effort, work hard, and you will eventually get it, like the language. I mean, like, generally speaking, as long as you don't really have any like difficulty in learning languages in general, I think most people will be able to do it. But the reason why I bring it bring up Bahasa Melayu, Bahasa Indonesia is because like phonetically they are similar to Japanese. Phonetically means like, for example, a, I, U, E, O. A, I, U, E, O. And like the N sound. Japanese doesn't have an NG sound like Korea has it. Is it the circle or something? But yeah. So linguistically, people whose like mother tongue is Bahasa Indonesia or Bahasa Melayu, phonetically it is similar to Japanese, and therefore it's like they would have they may have an accent, but it's a lot easier for them to pick up and to correct their pronunciation, as opposed to like, let's say, somebody who has lived in America all their life and has no connection with like the Japanese language at all. Like, let's say they only speak English, then yeah, they may have more difficulties like adapting to like the Japanese pronunciation, because the only difference between like Bahasa and like Japanese per se, I would say it's actually this, the way you pronounce this. It's like, because in like Malay at least, or like Indonesian at least, usually it's but in Japanese it's and but a, I, U, O, and they are pretty much, I would even dare say that they are like exactly the same. A, I, U, O, in Melayu and Bahasa Melayu and Bahasa Indonesia are like pretty much the same as like Japanese, like the way you pronounce it. I mean, normally we would say A, I, U, E, O, and but then you do understand that like some ethnic Japanese people, they have a tendency to, I'm not sure why this is the case, but they do have a tendency to sound more nasal, in the sense that instead of just saying like A, I, U, E, O, and they say A, I, U, E, O. Like some people are just more, they speak in a more nasal manner. So yeah, and even like, for example, it's like when you're speaking, right, you would say desu ga. You don't really say like desu ga. It's not like a hard G or anything. It's like desu ga. And then you will realize some people, they say desu ga, and some people say desu nga. Like you realize like the nga sound, even though it's this, but somehow the end sound kind of like desu nga. Like it kind of like creeps into, I'm not sure why this is like why this is even a case, but the end sound, even though there is no letter N or N over here, but it kind of like creeps into, like the pronunciation kind of like creeps into here. But the reason why I bring this up is because people who speak Bahasa Indonesia and Bahasa Melayu are familiar with this sound. Like this sound is actually present in their languages. And then there's also another one in which foreigners might struggle with. It's like people whose native language isn't Japanese. Like for example, there is like da, di, do, de, and do. Da, di, do, de, do. It's not like in English where you would say rari, ru, re, ra. It's not, the way you roll the R's are like, it's like a little different. There is more of a like D sound, and then there's more of a, like an L sound. And even in Korea, I don't know how to pronounce it properly, but there is this dish called sirlontang. I have difficulties pronouncing that because I don't speak Korean, but it's like sometimes Korea doesn't really differentiate between R and L. Wait, actually, because like in Korean it's like lir, like the sound is this, and it's kind of like, it's not entirely accurate to say this, but it's more of like an in-between sound between like L and R, but like, you know, there's a little bit more nuance to that than just like, oh, in between L and R. And even this, right, this is kind of like an in-between sound between like F and H. So it's like some people would say fu, some people would say hu. Like it's not just like hu, it's like hu, hu, hu. It's like an in-between an F and an H. So some people romanize this as F, some people romanize this as H, and honestly it kind of depends. It also depends on like which one flows better, kind of say. It's like you wouldn't really hear like a native Japanese person saying like, oh, fu, like Fuji-san. Like they wouldn't say it like this. They would say like, Fuji-san. And like hu. It's kind of like an in-between sound, like in between F and H. Like it's kind of like when the letters are like blended together. So that one is another example, but the reason why I brought this up as well is because this is something that people who speak Bahasa wouldn't really struggle with. I think they would be like decently good at this, because even in their own languages, right? Like for example, perhubungan kecemasan, like perhu, like the like the way they roll their R is like a little different, like whereas this one is like da di do da da. I know it's a different way of rolling it, but because like Bahasa doesn't really like have the stereotypical ra ri ru re ra kind of like in English, right? So because it's more of like rolling their R's is kind of like second nature for Bahasa speakers. So because of that, as compared to English speakers, they might be able to pick up this da-di-do-da-da sound faster than people who, like on average, faster than people who only speak English, for example. It's also the same reason why some people are just better at picking up French or Arabic phonetics, because they know how to do like the throat sound, whereas people like me would struggle doing it. Yeah, it's kind of like a similar thing. So even though Bahasa, like as languages, they don't really have like the Sinosphere vocabulary, but phonetically, it is actually easy for, like in this case, like the Indonesian bus drivers to, I'm not expecting them to like sound perfect or anything, but it's easier for them to be able to get used to Japanese pronunciation as opposed to people who exclusively speak English and therefore might have difficulties adjusting because they're just not used to like these sounds, for example, or they might say this with like a very hard G, like they would say desu ga instead of like desu ga, like desu ga. There is still a G sound, but it's not as like prominent. It's like desu ga, desu ga. Different people, they say it differently, and it also depends on how nasal some people get. Although there is this one thing when it comes to like in the bus or train industry, it's like if you are a conductor or like a driver in some cases, like one man operations, right, and you're required to give announcements, right, through like the PA system, like the passenger announcement system, and sometimes even though they don't really have like nasal voices per se, some people might, you know, they just recommend you to talk in a higher pitch or more nasal voice so that it is more clearly heard, as opposed to like when you try to like mumble train announcements, because you do know that some of like the more seasoned conductors, right, they have a tendency to like just mumble their words, because it's like whatever comes to your mind, they just like repeat it. So they have a tendency to mumble, and it's a little bit more difficult to try to catch what they're saying, even for native Japanese speakers, or even for people who are not native but they speak good Japanese, like something along those lines. So there is this thing about like intentionally sounding more nasal. I mean like it's not really related to this, but it's an interesting thing to point out as well. Jika Anda ternampak seseorang atau benda yang mencurigakan, sila lepaskannya kepada kaki tangan kami atau tekan butang berhubungan kecemasan yang ada di tepi pintu kereta api. So even with this example, right, it's just the sounds as compared to like the sounds. It's, you see phonetically, right, they are quite similar, or I would even say it's pretty much the same. Maybe with a few like slight subtle differences, like minute differences, but it's like, to me at least, it sounds the same. Like, jika anda seseorang, it's not seseorang, it's seseorang. You can see, it's similar. Butang berhubungan kecemasan yang ada di tepi pintu kereta api. Okay, that reminds me, there's actually one more sound. Z. Like basically the Japanese Z. This one, depending on what language your mother tongue is, you may be good at this or you may be not so good at this, but it's okay. With practice, you will become better at saying this. I'm pretty sure this sound doesn't exist in Bahasa. Like, they know how to say tu, like pintu. Tu. Pintu is door, so it's like they know how to say tu. Pintu shimarimasu. Tobira shimarimasu. Okay, you get my meaning. It's tu and z. So it's like, this one is probably one sound that they have to like get used to, but you know, I don't think this is like a major issue anyway. So whilst you can say that like East Asians or people from Vietnam, they might have like an advantage in learning Japanese because of Sino-Spirit influence, but remember that language isn't only about like, you know, Sino-Spirit influence in this context. It also depends on like pronunciation, how fast you pick up the language, but my main point is that people who speak Bahasa, they have an advantage over other languages, like most other languages, phonetically. Also similar to like the languages in the Philippines as well, like Tagalog, for example, which is like, is it the most spoken? Yeah, right. So I think Tagalog, it has Austronesian roots, right? Please correct me if I'm wrong. So I think a lot of the like Austronesian languages, they might have an advantage like phonetically when it comes to learning Japanese. But again, please correct me if there are people who indeed say seseorang and not seseorang, like especially when it comes to like, oh, people from Indonesia, people from Malaysia or Singapore or like southern Thailand or whichever place has like people of Cham, CHAM ethnicity or whatever, you get what I mean. I believe there are Malays in like South Africa as well. Like I just so happened to like read up on it. But yeah, different people learn differently. Some may have an advantage in one area, whereas other people have an advantage in another area. And this is my number one pet peeve with like Singaporeans in general, because I don't understand why Singaporeans have this stereotype that like, oh, you learn Chinese, right? So Japanese must be easy for you. No. I have seen people who they know Chinese very well, or maybe even Chinese is their mother tongue, but they actually struggle when it comes to Japanese. Like, not the characters per se, but like in other aspects as well, and the need for them to like code switch as well, as opposed to somebody like learning the language from scratch. So I don't even know why they have this like impression in the first place. And based on my personal experience, I have seen like people who are like, 中国語がわかるので、日本語が上手. I have some people that they just outright say this, but when it comes to like JLPT, they start fumbling or something along those lines. And you know, I mean, I'm just speaking based on like, it's anecdotal, like based on experience. So even if you have like an advantage when it comes to like, oh, the Sino-Spirit thing, that doesn't mean that like you wouldn't encounter like difficulties like learning the language as a whole, I would say. And then language is like tied to culture, and then it's also, there are also different levels of like politeness as well, and then times are changing as well, because it's like even girls use boku or ore nowadays. So it's not like Japanese textbooks, they can teach you like the history of phrases, but then in real life it's like a completely different story. And I also want to point out that plain form isn't rude. Like, there's a big difference between casual speech and using plain form. Like when describing something, you use plain form. But when you're addressing someone and you want to be polite, you use either polite form, or when the situation really calls for it, then you use keigo. So it's not like, oh, every single time I have to speak in like masu, masu, masu. It's not the case. Like a lot of people in real life, because they talk fast, right, they tend to talk in plain form, not casual, but like just normal conversations, plain form, and like not abbreviated or anything. So it's more of like they would plain form and then they would just add like no desu or desu if they want to like correct themselves on the spot. It's like instead of saying something like ありませんでした, which is like quite polite, by the way, they would say like なかった, but then なかった, like and when they want to correct themselves, they would be like, oh, なかったです, like なかったnoです, like they would, okay, this is more conversational than no des. No des is more of like a written form, but again, it's more of like, instead of saying ありませんでした, they would probably say something like, oh, なかったんです, which sounds more natural. And instead of saying like ありません, right, which is what textbooks teach you, and it's not wrong, but it's like in real life, you will hear, oh, ないです or ないんです ないです ないんです You would hear this a lot more often than ありません. And in fact, I would even argue that like ございません, like the written form, is more common than ありません. And the thing is, like, I hear 申し訳ありません 申し訳ございません I hear 申し訳ありません more than ありません like legitimately, based on experience. And usually when people even say ありません, right, it usually is like がありませんので yeah, it usually follows up with something. And if not, people would just default to like, oh, ないですないんです You don't really have to worry about when to use this or this or like だだであるのである Okay, the である thingy, the no である thingy is more of like written, so you don't really have to like be concerned about that when it comes to like conversations. But when to use this, when to use this or da I know there are people explaining it, but in real life, right, nobody really cares. Although I would just tell you simply, like, standard is this, but if you want to say, like, give people, like, a genuine reason why you did this or that, then it's like, this, then you would use this, I would say. But in real life, nobody really cares. Because that's not the main point of the sentence. The main point is, like, I want to catch the nouns, I want to catch the verbs. The this, it's just kind of like a polite speech thingy. Like, this can be used like as a cushion word to soften your tone per se. Now, one last part. Keigo. Keigo is something you use when you address customers, when you address your higher-ups, basically like a kind of speech that you use when you're working. Because I've seen a lot of people doing keigo on YouTube, and I find it really, really, really weird. Like, you don't come from an organization or anything, which is like I see all the people using keigo in like their community posts and like stuff like that, but I think that's more of like a cultural thing. It's like the bus driver would probably ask you something like instead of saying どこまで行きますか, they would be like どこまで行かれますか? So they change it to the passive form, but in this case the passive form, it's not really ukemi in a sense. It's ukemi ke, but like it's the passive form. But what they're really trying to do is to, in this context, right, soften your tone. Instead of saying どこまで行きますか, they would be like どこまで行かれますか as a form of like politeness. They use a passive form to convey politeness in your message. So this is the kind of keigo that you would see, that you would hear often in real life. Then instead of saying 食べます, right, which is like the normal form, they would say, お召し上がりください、おつかまりください. They wouldn't say like 召し上がってください, even though that's more of like a written form as opposed to like a spoken form. They wouldn't really say, oh, つかまってください. That one is more like direct, but おつかまりください, 敬語 is used to like, I know there are some instances whereby keigo could sound cold, but generally speaking, when people convey their message in keigo, it's to show politeness to you. I mean, how did a conversation about like Indonesian bus captains debuting in Japan turn into like a mini Japanese lesson from me? I don't know. I don't plan my videos, but I guess this is just the way things turn out sometimes. But hopefully you guys actually learned something useful from me, I guess. Okay, and one more thing to note is that the bus driver shortage in Japan is way more severe than the bus driver shortage in like say Singapore. So like they even in Japan, right, they had to cut away a lot of feeder services. Like, you know, Keisei, they used to run like, I forgot what was like the service number. It's like Nagareyama 01, 02, or 03. I think they cut away a lot of the routes, and then it became Anaba, which means like the place used to have a bus service, and then now it's like desolate, it's like empty, now you have to walk, that kind of thing. Or they cut the operation timings. It's like there is a Shinkeisei, which I know they renamed already, but it's like Shinkeisei Bus Service 3 that like serves between Matsudo, Kita Matsudo, which is like Matsudo North, I mean that station, and I think it's like Irio Center and some school. So it's like the sector between Matsudo and Kita Matsudo, it's like really degraded, and then the last bus used to be like 9 p.m. ish, they cut it to like 5 or 6 p.m. I forgot. But then they still have like, because they want to like concentrate the frequency, like they want to concentrate more resources on the sector between Kita Matsudo and like the terminating point, as opposed to like the buses that are departing from Matsudo or going to Matsudo per se. So yeah, because of like all the bus driver shortages, they have to like cut away a lot of bus routes. And Japan is more of like, they need blue collar workers, but their own people, like the younger generation, they are not so keen in taking up these blue collar jobs. And I don't know, maybe they prefer working in white collar jobs or something. I'm not really familiar with this trend, but so because their own people don't want to do these jobs, right? So now they are trying to open up to foreigners to fill up these positions. So yeah, that's the reason why Indonesian bus captain, like in this case, Indonesian bus drivers have debuted with Tokyu Bus, if I'm not mistaken. Please fact check me if I'm wrong. So it's not like a case of Singapore whereby, you know, there's low birth rate and then like, you know, the government is like trying to get people to become new citizens and not just PRs to like kind of like, you know, mitigate the effects of like the low birth rate, but then they don't even help their own citizens when it comes to employment. Wow, wonderful Singapore government, yay. Seriously, I really pity my friends who stay in Singapore right now. Because in Singapore, it's more of like, job opportunity wise, it's more of like the companies cut costs and they find it cheaper to hire foreign labor, so they, regardless of their skill level, so it's like they use these people to displace the locals. But in Japan, it's a different case, so I don't want any like xenophobia going on or anything, sort of things like this. You can make a point, but let's be objective about it. Because in Japan, no local, for some reason, no local wants to do this job. So we have to count on the foreigners to like fill up the positions. Otherwise, you would see more train routes getting cut, bus routes getting cut, their frequency is getting worse and stuff like that. And this is why I feel that bus and train companies, they shouldn't be so strict with like the Demen Tembo Doga, because it's like, you want people, regardless of whether they're foreigners or locals, to be interested in buses and trains in the first place. And what better way than to record the front view of the bus and train routes? I mean, that's the best way to get people interested in like your operations, right? I mean, buses and trains is obviously more than just Tembo, right? Yeah, like, you actually have to drive the train, and then in the operations and control center, these people have to like manage the train operations. Like, they have to like look at the diagram or something along those lines. It's like, but the main point is that like, I feel that there should be better initiatives to get more people in Japan, regardless of their nationality, to become more interested in buses and trains. Because if not, you will see more bus routes getting cut, you will see more frequency degradations. And you don't really want that to happen. So, and the thing is, public transit, whichever you call it, is an essential service. So this is my message to them. Let people film their Tembo. Like, some of my Japanese friends have been like bringing this issue up to me as well. It's like they low-key complain about it. Like, they don't outright say it out loud because they don't really want to disrupt the social fabric, but it's more of like they're saying that like Japan's Shozoken, which is basically the portrait rights thingy, which means like you're technically supposed to like censor other people's face online with if you upload a video without their permission, blah blah blah. But like, I get the intent of such quote unquote laws or rules and regulations, but I feel that they are being imposed too strictly to the point whereby it's like stifling the bus and train enthusiasts who just want to pursue their hobby. Obviously, if there are people who abuse their rights and stuff like that, we should call them out. But at the same time, I also feel that like the rules regarding like Shozoken in Japan are like overly strict, and I hope that will change in the future. So yeah, this is kind of a like comprehensive video about like Indonesian bus Indonesian bus drivers, like people whose nationality is Indonesian, them debuting in路線Bus in Japan, and some other issues that I probably took way too much time yapping about. But yeah,